Anna, could I have your attention, please? Before I introduce our expert, an amazing expert, I want to make an announcement, please. Ladies, somebody has lost this beautiful earring. Please, those of you who may have lost it, it was just found. Please let me know. Euro evaluated thing, and he says it's assessed it, and he says it's expensive. And you can't possibly lose it. Just, in other words, come up to me and you will get it back. Yes, this is like a Cinderella. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our next specialist. This is Ekaterina Schulman. And may I start with a story, private story, and my own story, which Golitsyno Schulman, who was then known by a different name, this story brought us together. Sometime between 1990s and 2000, it was the foundation to develop parliamentarism in Russia. It did expert evaluation of bills to be adopted by the State Duma from the perspective of civil society. That was independent expertise. And your humble servant worked there. And can you imagine how young Ekaterina was at that time? She's now certainly very, very young, but at that time she was just a school leaver, and we met quite a while ago. And she's a very intelligent woman. She is the one who understands things and matters to which she dedicated her professional life. It was visible and obvious then, but then it so happened then, you know, all initiatives of this kind, the foundation's fate was not very, it did not enjoy a very happy end, because somehow the country no longer required any kind of independent expertise and expert assessment. So probably we haven't seen each other for some years, but then at a seminar in Zelenogorsk, this remarkable expert surfaced, but she was known by a different name. That's why our joy that we met again was great. So Katya is now continuing to work with us. She's working with a school. Many of you know that she's writing prodigiously, and she works for many publications for many good reasons. The newspaper Vedomosti, well loved by those audience present here, as well as at many websites that I do not know. So I recommend to you one of the best specialists in modern legislative process in Russia. Why is she one of the best? Because it's hard to study a topic that is close to extinction in principle, but Ekaterina does it, and she does it in a very exquisite and elegant manner, refined manner, I would put it this way. So, dear colleagues, my recommendations. Enjoy. Thank you very much. Thank you for your flattering words. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak again at this school meeting after the event we held in March. It's the second time I speak for the school. I could see many of those present here attended the forum in March. I hope I'll get to tell you some new things which you haven't heard, which you didn't hear then. Dear colleagues, thank you very much. Indeed, I work for the legislative process, which the previous speaker called non-existent. I would beg to differ. This legislative process is alive and kicking and is present here in this room, and I have to say some good words about this process and for the organization, where the previous expert wanted to disperse a nitric dioxide. Maybe I can show you the positive role of today's legislative work and parliamentarism in Russia. It's input into, I wouldn't fear this word, global political science and in the bright future of the humankind. And I shall now set up slides in my presentation and some pictures. Hope it will make you treat better this subject. May I start with this? Last time I spoke before this audience, I tried to give a sketch of how legislation works in terms of political component. as a political component when people try to agree on political interests between different stakeholders and groups. And we were saying what would happen when this progress of trying to come to common ground is driven into a non-public sphere, into behind the closed doors discussions, accelerated formal procedures, and we discussed the outcome of this. Nowadays we'll try to look at those two stages of legislative degradation which we are seeing right now. The first stage we already passed, and the second is now in full blossom. Let me describe them. Why is it important? Why does it matter? You see, some people have to serve as a negative example for neighboring countries and for generations to come. Somebody should become the hero of the book whose epigraph would run, "Children, do not try to imitate this character." Somebody must play. Now, on the forefront of the global political science is the hybrid regimes. Hybrid regimes are somewhere in between dictatorship and democracy. Since this is just something that is not yet evolved as a notion, they're called electoral dictatorships, non-liberal or imitation democracy. The best examples are considered to be Russia and Venezuela. As well as it is well thought that somewhere close to it are Turkey, Egypt, Tunisia. Russia and Venezuela are considered to be some classical examples. Russia, even greater epitome of classicism, because we are a large and very bright country, and that it's a country where many democratic institutions are only an imitation, and where they show a high level of transparency at that, and those formalized processes which are taking place in the country. So it's not my assessment, it is my colleague from Oxford who deals in legislative process. The level of transparency, for example, in our State Duma is higher than the British Parliament. It's very much like the American Congress. Whatever we can see, observe and study, yes, it's there. It's present, it's visible, it's open. Come on and study it. This is where I can say that all international political scientists are tremendously envious of us, because this is what they had only under the Edwards. And now it is in some latent, non-interesting form, but whereas with us it's all coming to a head, and it's almost a gangrene. And so clearly for a specialist who is not squeamish about it and who has scientific curiosity, this is truly priceless. Therefore, someday, I hope in some historically close perspective, people may say, look, this is what happens when you ignore political nature of lawmaking. This is what happens when you shrink Parliament's rights. This is when you switch the centre of gravity into the executive government that is not public in its very essence. So do let us look at what goes on. Basic process of transformation of Russian lawmaking in the last, say, 10 years was about... I apologize, they suggest that I should speak slower. The basic characteristics of this transformation was the following. The process of lawmaking was becoming less public and more, let me put it this way, in a linear sense, effective. Roughly speaking, the State Duma adopted more and more laws, and it took them shorter and shorter time to do it. Therefore, the process of coming to agreement about the interests did not take place in the State Duma, but it could not go away. These groups never disappear. Any law that is adopted in the long run is all about redistribution of government. Therefore, all these questions have to be addressed and have to be discussed somewhere. The discussion and resolution came to be something behind the scenes, somewhere within the executive government, whereas the number of actors who are allowed to discuss it is growing narrower and narrower. In other words, the group that owns power would push out the other groups and didn't take into consideration these groups. What did it lead to? So behind the scenes, we see only the strongest, the surveillance. So to say, an elephant and a whale. But what happens if an element mounts a whale? God knows what would happen. At first stage of our lawmaking degradation, it led to the adoption of laws. They're called in Parliament and near the Parliament what we call framework, legislative framework. Legislation that where doesn't say anything, that has some kind of very generic description of how things should be, and then reference to bylaws. What is bylaw? Bylaw is governmental decree. This is special instructions by ministries. Who is producing them? Civil servants who work for the executive government. Is their activity open? No, it is not. Public? No. Is it regulated? No. Therefore, all this lawmaking procedure and the point of all this would go deeper and deeper behind the scenes. The laws would become more and more senseless, but that was only stage one. What followed was stage two, which was pretty much interesting and unexpected. Seemingly, if we continue this line, the State Duma should become a more and more boring and formal place where nothing would happen. They're sending something in from the Kremlin and the White House, and then they rubber stamp it. But this has never happened. Instead, we see stage two of what we call crazy printer, when the State Duma became the focus of public attention, when it had some outrageous events, when it became the focus of a certain center of gravity and center of force, which sends out these impressive waves that society can perceive. Whether society approves or not, it's a different story. This is what something that unexpectedly followed, although it should not have been the same. What is interesting here? Nowadays, it's our stage two of destructive lawmaking. We will discuss it in greater detail. The topic of my presentation is 3 kinds and 3 degrees of public harm. And we will see to which extent all the 3 of them are linked, let me put it this way, how they go back to the same global problem, violation and redistribution of power in favor of the executive. Another thing that characterizes hybrid regimes, those people who study them and their legislatures, they usually write that these kinds of regimes where parliament is only a decorum and parties are also decorum and elections are either a piece of theatre or rigged. So lawmaking is something that only the top leader does. What is typical is what we call 1990s, we call it decree law. The parliament adopts what it wants, but the president or the supreme shah would issue his supreme firman. But we do not see it in this country. Our variety of hybrid regime is depersonified. Instead of having a rubber-stamp parliament and the supreme leader who sort of issues his decrees, instead we have a parliament which adopts a great number of laws, which in their turn would then send us to a greater number of bylaws. We do not have this like something coming from the top. We have a pyramid, then a huge bar, and then under it something that goes down, something like the fungi have the fili. So it's something what nobody does, this apparatus life. Emperor Nikolai Pavlovich once said that Russia is governed I'm not the ruler in this country, it's 30,000 senior officials, but nowadays there are about 3 million, and this trend is continuing. This is something that is an interesting characteristic of hybrid regime that we have here. Hybrid regimes are considered to be, speaking about historical optimism, is something in go-between. It's not so much the state of society. It's so interesting to study it because it's something in between, between gas and liquid, crystal and, if you will, molding clay. And it's thought that in terms of historic process, they don't stay long in this form. They either transform into democracies, non-illusionary, or they transform into dictatorship, pure and simple. I think that, as I'm in the historically optimistic, I think we would end in option 1. Because whatever they say about surveys, we have an educated country, we have mostly urban population, and I continue to think that the main contradiction of today is the lack of a harmony between archaic governance system and the level at which the society is developed. However, this government tries to shut its eyes upon it by publishing public opinion surveys. Sociology is not my major, so I'm still suspicious about sociology as a science. I think it's an instrument of propaganda. And secondly, it's a variety of modern astrology. And astrologists try to predict the future, and sociologists try to describe the present along the same lines. So an astrologer says, Mars is in house 2, you will lose your hair. And he says, Mars in house 2, 82% of population think that you do not have your own mind and you don't need it. Neither do they. And we have to live with this view, and I don't see where is the value of this data. I would suggest that we should evaluate the level of society's development not in the way they answer the questions, because God knows who made these questions and what is their attitude towards surveys. Maybe they may think it's their bosses checking on them. I would suggest that we should judge by the society depending on what it does. This is where we see that stronger public activity, civil activity, we see, despite the stronger public pressure we see on NGOs, we see still a vague movement which clearly indicates that this picture of social apathy and contentment with what the government do somehow doesn't fit in. They don't fit in. So now, once I've described the situation as a whole, let's look in greater detail at the characteristics of our lawmaking process. I will now show you slides. They will have pictures. They will have pics. These are what the pics look like. Responsibility for whatever, nobody is liable. All the illustrations were drawn in the 15th centuries, or any coincidences will be only a matter of accident. So in the early July, the spring session of the State Duma ended. It was a record session in a number of laws that adopted. It is really the most fruitful spring session ever. So depending on how you count, as to new laws that were either adopted or, say, signed into effect, I don't want to bore you with statistics, something from 200, depending on 259. It depends on methodology. New bylaws, it has approved, read, very many. So the productivity continues to grow, and the time that elapses between the time when you only suggested for the first reading and till they adopt it into law, it's getting more and more fantastically short. For the first time, the number of laws among those who were adopted, introduced by the deputies, exceeded those introduced by the government. So much for formal rubber sort of stamping, rubber stamp parliament. It does not mean that our State Duma is getting more conscientious or is better in lawmaking. In technical terms, it means that ministries and agencies who fear lengthy procedures as they bring their initiatives through the government, they actually do it through lobbies and through deputies where they send their laws. It's well known that agencies have no right of the lawmaking initiative. They should appeal to the Commission on lawmaking in the government, and this is where inhuman struggle between the interests takes place. This is the hot heart of our lawmaking. They fear to go there because they will be met by the whale as the elephant, by the hybrid between tiger and lion. So that's why they would find somebody who will introduce it all. But nevertheless, you cannot disregard the facts of higher and greater deputy activity. I'll try to explain to you what's the point of it and what's the danger of it. Well, out of the total number of laws that were adopted, in terms of the number and the degree of the harm they can make, I would identify three groups. The first group is like this. The most, let me put it this so, the ones that attract greatest media attention, they are the laws that ban something. Well, you see somebody is really reprimanding somebody else. This is something simple. It's something that's irritating you greatly. And let me put it this way, it has the enjoys highest press coverage and the best coverage, best press, and say which the State Duma did not adopt a ban to ban lace knickers in Russia, but whatever. So many things took place, very much like in the joke about, but if we haven't done anything, but we don't. But they have adopted quite a few. But in terms of impact on the legal field, I would put them as the least harmful category of laws. Why? They are the ones who are brief and short. It's easy to write a bill, to introduce, say, a new article into Code of Administrative Felony and say it's nuisance or whatever is forbidden from 11 p.m. till 6 o'clock in the morning. This is not, so to say, it doesn't destroy the legal field. It's just an individual ban. What is bad about it? It's those whose activity was banned. It's clear that if you were arrested at the unsanctioned rally and then you will be put to jail for the second time, well, it will be very harmful to you, but not very harmful for the law. But if you look at the overall picture, the big picture, then indeed these bans bear least harm. Besides, it's easier to repeal them. The same brief law repeals them and things go back to normal. People are going to attend rallies and adopt children and whatever. Although the child who was never adopted, he may not even survive, will not be much consoled by this. But in terms of big processes, big picture, this is the case. I say that the key property of these laws is instability. They are easy and fast to adopt, usually because of high-profile matter. For example, somebody wrote in the blog about, say, the 9th of May, we shall adopt a law that bans, how can you desecrate a date? It's voodoo, but I don't understand it. This is where interpreter begs to differ. But this is voodooism, but somebody say in the West offended us, okay, we will ban Visa and MasterCard. They basically adopted it and then frightened and intimidated them all. Then the vice executive government comes into play and they say, look, you've done something, maybe you've gone overboard. Let's just play it down. And they introduce an amendment which says, well, Visa and MasterCard may stay. But as to ban on smoking in public spaces, maybe in verandas of open spaces, yes, you can. What is achieved by this? First, they destabilize the legal environment. First, people are intimidated by the law that will ban it all-out ban, and then say, no, we won't have an all-out ban, and the people are very happy. Yes, okay. And this is, to put it this way, in terms of situation, but in terms of strategic thinking, thus, again, they are approving the concept of wise executive and silly legislative government. We shall see later on that the same trend will be even greater, it will highlight it even greater. At that the State Duma is not truly a lawmaker, it's only the central element of this lawmaking mechanism. But it is the one that is fully responsible for the laws that are being adopted. In other words, a situation has evolved when a set branch of government at the same time does not enjoy rights, but is still bearing responsibility for what it does. It doesn't have greater capacity to influence many things, but it is held as liable. This is called a scapegoat, when you cannot do anything but you are to blame. We remember that the executive government can at any stage suspend the law or its reading, which is disliked at any time, let alone presidential veto, let alone the Council of Federation, which is rarely ever declining to examine it. President almost never, and the Council of Federation very rarely. There could be negative feedback from the government. There are representatives of the Duma and of the President. Surely they will be heard. These are formal instruments, let alone informal. At that, when they adopt something, they say, look, the State Duma has banned something. And the government sort of permitted something, or say softened it down. This is, it plays into somebody's hands, but it's asymmetrical. Well, from direct bans, we move over to Group 2, Group 2 destruction of institutions. These two categories, categories 1 and 2, are sort of mutually merging. For institutions to work, we should see this process which is institutionalizing. These are processes that stand still. For example, NGO Institute. This is frozen project of activity. If, say, people are forbidden from attending the rallies, then this institute of, peaceful rallies may simply go extinct, although we need lots of time. But destruction of institutions, this is a specific activity of lawmakers. Now we see good examples of this kind of laws. They are very bad, whatever is mentioned there. Institutions would be, once we've destroyed it, it's very hard to restore it. The ban, yes, you can repeal it immediately, whereas a destroyed institution, people just go away and the skills are lost, expertise disappears or becomes old. Destruction of institutions is a great sin. Why is it that the key property of such laws is uncertainty? What do I mean by uncertainty? Laws that destroy some institutions, especially civil society, they are written deliberately in a very vague manner. All of those present here probably know about a notorious vague character of the definition political activity, where people are awarded the notorious title of foreign agent. From legal perspective, this just makes no sense. We went to the Constitutional Court for interpretation, but it was not particularly, did not make the situation more understandable. However, if we judge by the previous number of laws that the Russian lawmakers adopted, then by political activity, you can only and exclusively understand political voting, participation in a candidate as a candidate, or public support of a candidate of a party. This is the definition in the law on judges. They cannot be elected as deputies and they cannot publicly support anybody. This is the only reasonable definition in public activity, and this fully complies to Russian political praxis and legal tradition. What they're writing to us right now, like influencing what the governments do, impact on public opinion, this is just phrases in words. We want to buy the license, but not right now. Sorry, we lost something. We lost, and probably all air conditioning went down. No, it seems to work. We do have broadcast.
We'll find out. Boris saying that Katya's energy is so powerful that she short-circuited all wires here. Or somebody just hooked in and is eavesdropping us. Let's move on. Let's move on. The review, rest of on the ideas. Typology of laws, those who constrain the freedom of choice, freedom of civil society, freedom and independence of research establishment and judiciary are drafted in such a way that the final use of those laws could be the competence of the executive branch, law enforcement bodies of the lower level. So those authorities are delegated to the bottom. And that ambiguity serves to the fact that the final arbiter is just an ordinary policeman or a police officer or a legal counsel who otherwise couldn't have impacted public opinion. From the justice standpoint, ambiguity is deaf to laws. A law is something that is to be very clearly, unambiguously stipulated. There could not be any subjective mode. The law could be cruel, but it should be just. So laws cannot be interpreted or misinterpreted. That's a law. And it reads just that we should not be engaged in political activities with foreign funds. It's not a law. It's something that requires interpretation. And there is the third type of legislative or law-making harm. It's the crown of the two previous types. So the laws that are listed here looks like even less terrible than the previous two. Perhaps some of them are even good. Let's decide if 10% of the welfare fund can be spent for buying shares. We don't know if it's good or not, if there is any corruption element or there is no corruption elements, but all laws passed by the crazy printer leads to the fact that all the authorities are delegated to the executive branch. And because of that, and exactly it happened during the spring session of the legislature, and that trend sounds quite alarming to me. I'm talking about some rumors on the necessity to constrain the rights of legislators because they pass inadequate laws. And nobody would really side with the legislators to protect them, because legislators have proved to be the people who do not deserve sympathy. But my argument is, it is the legitimate branch of power. And if we curb their authorities, they wouldn't become more legitimate and reasonable. And I have a feeling that the suggested amendments lead to the situation then that a printer that has gone crazy takes its own decision. And we say, let's do something so that it wouldn't operate all the time. Perhaps we'll have less terrible laws. But it's not the case. If we prohibit everything, it would mean that it would be the executive power that would decide what exactly and when exactly can be prohibited. So they'll bring the details. And that's the picture, a very troubling picture that I was going to describe. But being an optimist, I would say that hybrid regimes in their current shape do not last long. And despite all filters, and despite some new rules for the elections of 2016, which are a little bit more relaxed than those of 2012, I think the elections will be interesting at least, and new legislators will be made up of not only those who qualify on party lists, but those who win in the majority constituencies. So it would be harder for the officials to rig the elections. So it means that rules have been improved a little bit. And we should keep in mind that all those odd things about the legislative work or lawmaking root deeply into non-representativeness and not legitimacy of elections. Should the elections be more free, then the situation could be different. And if we are as imitation or simulation democracy, then for it, it's quite better. And those institutions, even if they are not deciding anything, but still, the only fact that they are in place, it's better. And there was a joke or a piece of lyric in the Soviet times that cowards always try to climb high into the trees not to be visible. But anyway, we believe that we can be sad about the constitution or the law being the simulation of true laws, but still it's better to have some than no. So those mock-ups sometimes can be filled with real content, and they will certainly turn into some live organisms. So I would like to end on that optimistic note and take your questions. That final note was wonderful, and the colleagues, if you recall yesterday's sessions when I was talking about federalism as a sleeping institution, it was exactly about that rubber doll that Katya referred to in her talk. Please, you from the far rows. I'm Artur Rudakov from Rostov-on-Don. Responding to your imitation or simulation democracy, where is the demarcation line between the simulated democracy and real democracy? We have about 3 parties in the North Korea, in Iran, in Turkmenistan. There are some parties. So where did you see the demarcation line? It's a very interesting question, and the global political science is trying to find an answer. Till recently, the top criterion was a direct election of the top leader of the country, president or prime minister. But then people realized that elections are held everywhere and hard to understand whether there is competition or not. But the peculiar feature about this simulated democracy is that it simulates not only just one institution, but a number of institutions, and it becomes hard to simulate them all, and all out of a sudden one of the institutions becomes alive. And if there is some number of parties, even if they are only formally in opposition, if there are some non-state-run media and NGOs, and if there are some signs of freedom of the regime as a free exit, free entry into the country, then based on all those components, decent play can be played. And if the boundaries of the country are fully locked, sealed, and then everybody goes to the elections voting for Mr. Stalin, then certainly the regime is truly authoritarian. I understand that I didn't give you the exact answer to your question, and the reason is that there is no holistic concept on that particular account, but there are there is room for new discoveries. And your question, please. I'm Anna Velikok from the Leningrad region. Recently, we had the pleasure of the company of Mr. Zubov, who is a legislator of the State Duma. So when he was asked how he had voted on Dima Yakovlev draft law, he said that there are some responsible people for voting and they vote for others. I studied the charter of the legislature, and it reads that a legislator has personal responsibility to vote for himself or herself, and if he or she cannot, they have to write some kind of a report and give it as a proxy. So I wonder if that vicious practice can be tracked and put under control. Well, I understand your question. You know how it is done. When a new parliament is elected, MP writes some report to the coordinator of the political faction in the State Duma, and that report reads, I, name and so and so, cannot be present at the session because of something, and I delegate my authority to vote to the party coordinator, to the factions coordinator. So that report is given to the coordinator, and all them are kept in a safe, and if somebody comes to inspect, those reports are taken out of the safe, dates are indicated in those reports, and they produce them as a proxy. Well, how can it be terminated? I think if there is a will to do so, it can be terminated very quickly. Some rule are to be introduced, and it can resolve the problem. And legislators are not always given their cards to vote because they may lose it, they may give it to somebody else, and so those voting cards are kept in a safe too. And there are special runners, so to say, which manage to very quickly insert those voting cards into the machines and vote for 10 or even 15 legislators, while the factions coordinator really orchestrates the process. Okay, I will not use my hands, but still they make some signs to those runners and make sure that those runners do not mix anything. So that the burden of deputies is not that easy, as you can see. As for Dima Yakovlev law, and MPs get very much angry when asked about voting on such laws, when they are put to shame for passing such laws, but they get angry. And they had to sign the application for the initiation of drafting of that law. So virtually all State Duma deputies had to sign that application. In the State Duma, they call it a political solution. So each individual MP feels like not involved, and when you start criticizing him for that, he feels like just if you are asked that why do you carry a two-headed Russian passport, because two-headed eagles and even single-headed eagles are predators and they eat other animals. So they reply by saying that it's what we have to do to pay back for our election. So I don't think that have any moral pains because of that. They do it if they have to, and then forget about that. That's their work. You can understand them, or you cannot understand them if you don't like it. I would add that this collective management of cards started from 2003. Before that, it was not institutionalized. No reports were written by deputies, and the deputies just took those cards and ran across rows voting. The other thing to do, and if we learn from world experience, we'll see that in many parliaments of the world, they do with voting cards the same. I don't think that we can achieve 100% presence of the deputies, and we don't have to try to do so. If a parliament is competitive, the situation cannot exist. People will not give their voting cards because they will be afraid to lose their position. But I can insist that there is a difference there if you are elected on a party list and if you are elected by majority of the people in a constituency. It makes a difference. Because if people voted for you in a constituency, then they will they may make you accountable for wrongdoings. But if you are elected on a party list, well, certainly you don't care of giving your card to somebody else to vote for you. So the cure of anything is not the struggle for discipline, but the political competition. Well, now I know why you entitled your presentations as a card house. A house made of cards. It's not about the soap opera, but that really shows the true parliamentary process to us. Alexandra, I'm Alexander Azarchina from Ukraine. If the trend of the substitution of legislative power for executive power continues, then what shall we do with that imperative mandate? Because even those parties that are in power will not be respected. Or perhaps a system will be built that there will be no need to care about agitation and propaganda in constituencies. Thank you very much for your question. I'm afraid on that imperative mandate because it is something that is mostly liked in totalitarian countries such as Cuba, North Korea and China. And it looks attractive because for the public it can be presented as an enhanced responsibility of MPs because it might show that MPs should really care what they vote for. But what it could lead in reality? Well, on the party list, only trusted candidates are included, and the presidential administration has a number of methods to impact on the people so that they would forget how they vote. And in this particular case, a mandate can be recalled, and mandates are entrusted to deputies during elections, so they are just immune from any other actions. And even when you fight corruptions and a prosecutor comes to the legislature asking MPs to vote for making a certain suspect not immune, I wouldn't agree with that. If a wrong person is elected, let him stay in parliament for 4 years, or 5 years, but you will learn from that lesson, and next time you will vote for a proper candidate. A good deputy is an elected deputy, and it doesn't mean that that's a decent person and doesn't have any property abroad. And even lawyers, during elections, they are supposed to present nominees to the electorate. In the former elections, 4 times journalist Nevzorov was elected. 4 times he was elected, but he never appeared in the State Duma. But he was repeatedly elected. So I think that it's okay if voters in a constituency believe that it's the best way for them to be represented. Okay, let them vote for him. And the argument that those elected candidates don't go to the legislature, perhaps it's use those voters. Thank you, Catherine, and separate thanks for that card-made house. Okay. But my question is not about the U.S. Parliament. It's about a smaller parliament, about regional parliaments. So my feelings are that actual activities take place in regional parliaments rather than in the State Duma. Or perhaps it's only our luck in Kaliningrad. You are located closer to Europe, and perhaps that's the reason. But don't you think that regional parliaments are a hope of proper parliamentary development in Russia? Thank you. Yes, it seems to me the case. I think so. And together with Mr. Zakharov, I believe that federalism is Russia's future hope. And I would vote for delegating maximum authority to regional parliaments. And the fact that regional parliamentaries are more active is the fact that they are closer to the field. They are working in the field. And the trend to usurp all revenues and authority to the federal center is terrible. It's not only because it uproots federalism, but undermines political culture opportunities. And one of the worst laws passed in the previous session were the amendments, or just the new version of the law on local governance. As the restrictions on mayor's elections. In the last minute, they added some kind of an opportunity to elect the mayor directly, but otherwise it's terrible. All those authorities, as well as revenues, ought to be there in the regions, in municipalities. Otherwise, it's a shame. Alexandra, your question, please. I'm Alexander Shitova from Pskov region. In the previous lecture, Boris Makarenko compared privatization with democratization, and democracy is the two-way traffic between society and the regime. You told us about the destruction of the institution, and I think that the problem is that they are passed quite quickly, and that's a problem not of legislators, but of the people who cannot, just do not have time to respond properly to such lawmaking. I think that's the problem of the culture of the society that cannot respond properly to those actions. I don't agree with your last assumption. I don't like any speculations about the subject-like mentality of the Russians. If people are given enough freedoms and rights, they will never be slaves, they will never be subject-minded. But I'm not going to go deep into that. But as for the feedback, probably it's the case. And in terms of lawmaking, the vicious circle is that what we see on TV is the distorted format of feedback. Feedback is quite obvious. And when channels of feedback are cut, then it has to be substituted for something. Our deputies are not elected by voters directly. Civic society, democratic elements are not invited to the parliament. So what deputies can do when they feel they need to have some life, some links with the public? Television. On TV, they see that somebody arranged or started a fight on board a plane, being drunk. So that deputy thinks that this is the reality. Let us draft a law prohibiting drinking on board. And TV is not a window to real life, as we all understand. It's the bright eyes or kerosene film on the surface of water. It distorts things. So if something is said on air, it doesn't mean that all people want to prohibit homosexuals or same-sex marriages. But deputies would like to be, or at least they want to think as being close to the people. So they take those initiatives. But otherwise, television is perceived by them as some early warning system, giving some signals of what people want. And when there are free elections and legislators feel that they will not depend on the Kremlin but on his voters, he will very quickly realize what voters need. What they really need: direct elections of mayors, free healthcare, curbing migration. So it will get clear quite fast. And those signs that in our case are referred to as public opinion will disappear, in fact. I'm Stanislav Abramenko from Rostov-on-Don. I'm curious. Those combat operations and external threat to Russian elites, will it have any impact on the regime that we live under? On the one hand, economic sanctions can make it weaker and bring its disaster closer. But it may also unite the elites and make their split less possible. You know, it's not my cup of tea. I'm not an expert on elites, and I can speak of only my small vicinity. I expect depression starts in the fall. In spring, we had that rise of patriotism, and in the fall, depression may come to replace it. So was the feeling of euphoria in spring, but even that rise of patriotism didn't stop the authorities from introducing other prohibitions. So there were 85% approval of what Putin did, and still. And there were some manias. But in the fall, when the depression period comes, some frontal unity is to be demonstrated, and repressive, prohibiting activities will become even stronger. There will be feelings that we are surrounded by enemies, but there will be no feeling that we are winning. On the contrary, we will feel like a surrounded and besieged fortress. Attempts will continue to, as we put it, to bomb the city of Voronezh. So we will keep on bombing Voronezh. We will impose bans on imports of all fruits and vegetables from abroad. It's not the State Duma that is involved, but they can switch to those practices as well.
And if I may make a step into the field of the study of the elites, there will be a lot more mobilizational rhetoric alongside with growing mutual discontent of the elites, and every tiger will have a modicum of a resentment towards the elephant sitting in the next cage. So Mr. Gorbatin from the Parliament. Deputy of the Legislative Assembly of the Kaluga region. This convention has amended the Russian constitution twice. The latest one appears to be the least well understood. Why did the President amend the constitution with respect to the Council of Federation plus 10%? I'm not quite versed in this, because the Council of Federation is not in any particular way a coherent institution, but the cause or the reason for this innovation is quite secret to me. He got the opportunity to appoint 10% of the senators as his own representatives. How about the other senators? Were they not selected by the president or the presidential staff? The Council of Federation is an unhappy child of the Russian constitution. Mr. Satarov is not here. We could have asked him. I think that the Council of Federation is not elected, and the principles of its formation are changed so often, more often than any other legal norms. What is the cause or the reason for such innovations? The Council of Federation used to be the carrier for those people who had problems with the law. Then the people who are delegated to the Council of Federation and sit there today, I have no idea what they do. Do not have an answer. It appears that the administrative machine must do something for a purpose, and so I guess they might wanted to have some additional places to be played out at this stock exchange and for the different senators. Maybe this is done. You would have a 10% bonus if you were appointed as the presidential nominee. With that said, the Constitution of the Russian Federation contains an amazing norm for a federative state, whereby any decision of the Council of Federation can be overridden by the 2/3 of the State Duma, or the lower house, which means that if you have the controlling package in the lower house, you may pretty much disregard the upper house. It would be very surprising to find anything of that kind in any other federative state. Marina Ilyushenko, Khabarovsk. I would like to talk about local self-government. In 2003, over 100 amendments were adopted, and not very long ago, even President Putin said the laws on municipal self-government are being washed out. And indeed, we work in towns and cities, and not many of us work in the cities and towns. People want to cut up the constituencies in such a way for people not to vote in a compact way. And indeed, Russia is about 10 cities. These 10 cities have a vast majority of the working and producing people. So this is not good. Anyway, hyper-urbanization is not good, but this is a fact of life. Clearly, the life in a city presupposes a certain freedom. Life in the city gives a person an idea that he or she has some rights. It gives a different level of communication to create horizontal ties and some sort of social networks. All these things are certainly of certain apprehension to the government, but it behaves in such a way as if it does not enjoy any support whatsoever. So the plan was made to admix this rural and urban population, and the constituencies would be located where the press would never get there, and the constituents would live very remotely. Well, this is all a disgrace. This is just a part of what I already mentioned. The confiscation of the monies towards the center and the elements of that same process. As a result, everything is concentrated in Moscow, and everything is concentrated in Moscow. So hence we see that the number of the civil servants is decreasing. In other words, I would certainly be voting for maximum urban self-government. For the cities with the population of over 1 million people would have more self-government. Direct mayors of the mayor, direct elections of the mayor, direct elections of the town hall, and of course a proportion majority system and not party lists. Nikolai Yamalchikov, Tyumen region. I wanted to get back to the standing order. If a deputy leaves the faction, then his deputy responsibilities are cancelled. But there were two interesting situations when Lev Ponomaryov decided to leave Spravedlivaya Rossiya party, and now he's an independent deputy. That's number one. And number two, the second case is Dmitry Gudkov, who has now been dismissed, but he's still a member of the faction. Now, why has this point been preserved, or is this a lobbied liberal part, and we could hope to have such independent deputies and in 2016? There is no bystanding order. Such a norm, the deputies do not cease to be deputies. The MPs continue to be MPs. They can be expelled from a faction. It is true. Deputy groups are banned in today's Duma, so any deputy work is possible for an MP within the faction. So if he leaves the faction, he does not cease to be an MP. Gennady Gudkov was stripped of his mandate by the House, but not because he left the faction, but at the recommendation of the Attorney General's office and the Prosecutor's office because of the activities that he was engaged with, incompatible with the parliamentary work. And in the same way, he can be stripped of immunity. With Mr. Gudkov, the elder, an even more interesting legal case collision occurred. In 2013, there was a decision of the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court decreed that stripping him of immunity was quite illegal. So the criminal case has been suspended, has been stopped. Good evening. 3 questions. During the Crimean events, did the deputies wear the ribbons, the orange and brown ribbons? Second question, do you believe that people will that the Duma will allow small arms to be used only if it has a ribbon? Small arms. And the depressive period in autumn. Do you not think that this hyperactivity of the deputies would decrease? No? Alexei Kiryanov from Rostov-on-Don. With respect to the ribbons, I don't sit there all the time. I know that they all came with the big ribbons to the historical session devoted to the Crimea. With respect to the small arms, what are you talking about? They will not allow anything. First of all, the only thing that they were doing is cancelling the rights of the citizens, nothing whatsoever. Not even the patriotic festivities. So nothing would ever be would ever be allowed. Even if you're a patriot, this will never save you from a policeman, and I can guarantee that. With respect to the depression, how does it influence people in depression? Medically speaking, breeds apathy, but the MP depression may be somewhat different. So far, we have not had any situation. The only difference is that it is the so-called budgetary session. And we expect that we have a very interesting budgetary situation, the economic situation, the hard currency. We have many interesting ideas about the taxes, so there will be many things to talk about. But because the budget is just one thing, it's just one draft law, this is not too much. So it may be that they may adopt less laws than, say, in spring. Boris Grazowski. Thank you. Yesterday, Yuri Petrovich Sinakosov, when Mr. Zakharov spoke, asked and had a very kind words for the simultaneous interpreters, but indeed the simultaneous interpreters' black day arrived today. Are you aware, Mrs. Schulman, of any interesting initiatives of the legislative assemblies which could have been able to forward or advance or adopt some interesting initiatives? And is it possible to help such legislative assemblies? My second question is, over the past 2 years, there have been some initiatives that Mikhail Krasnov asked to propose a new constitution. Mr. Klyamkin and others have had some interesting initiatives with respect to the anti-monopoly law. Some of our friends had some proposals with respect to the legislative moves, the crazy, as some call them, legislative moves taken in the past 2 years to be called back. And there are some people who are dealing with these things to try and make a shadow Duma or a shadow cabinet, if you wish. Well, let me first say that indeed there are some interesting projects, such as the blacklist of the laws to be called back, and how can such laws be called back? Should it be? And I think that this is all extremely an extremely valuable thing, and we should not wait. We should not wait until the true fair elections take place. I think that the civil society must have some drafts, because when the actual question arises, we have to be active, and we have to make the proposals, and it appears that nobody else would have any proposals. The administrative machine is in such a state that the planning horizon is no more than a day. If you think that there are any specific plans, no. The higher is the level of the actual body of power. The more this body of power is preoccupied with the ritual, and everybody else is interested in upholding their level of life, and never to make or accumulate the trouble. However, today there are more and more black swans and bad news, which certainly does not make the state machine in any way more logical or more intelligent. And clearly, these are not the conditions, this is not the environment where the great statesman may be nurtured. So if there are people who are ready to help, if there are people who can make valuable proposals regarding the legislation or legislature, indeed, this has to be made as early as possible. This pertains to the independent judiciary, to withstanding the corruption, the people who know these things do not work for the state. Some of them are in the academia, some of them in the educational establishment, or else there are many people who have such knowledge. I think that the patriotism tells them to know and to express what they know, and to have this anxiety induced bag of proposals, portfolio. And in the regions, the situation is even more drastic. Well, actually, it's less drastic than in the federal center. In the regions, such draft laws can well be structured. So, how does the civil society enter the parliament? If the deputy wants to look well in the eyes of the constituents, they start to call in the outside inspectors, the inspectors coming from the outside. What and who would write these things? And the only people who have some ideas about this are the experts. In this sense, one of the most tragic things that happened with the contemporary Russian parliament is that the expert organizations and the expert community has generally been dismissed from participation in the draft law creation. Today, when the deputies either think up themselves or else get some recommendations from the so-called chief state legal administration, then indeed this has significantly dulled the process of lawmaking. For this reason, it may be easier for the NGOs, expert institutions, to enter this orbit of lawmaking in the regions. There may be people who are better versed in the system of say, healthcare or education, or be better versed in the specific fields. I certainly encourage the professionals and the experts to try and have a report with the regional parliaments. Ekaterina, if I may debate your point. I agree with you in everything, except for I do not believe that in the regions, the parliaments work in any way better. If you think, if you ask your colleagues what percentage of the so-called non-Единая Россия MPs, you will be unpleasantly surprised. How many representatives of other parties do you have in the local legislation? And he will say, none. We take all decisions, so we have a very well smooth parliamentary mechanism. What is Единая Россия? Don't criticize it. No, it is not an idea, a party of ideology. It is a party with a very wide, view of life. Who can have So you believe that the so-called national traitors will help you? Yes, the national traitors get everywhere, including Единая Россия. Alexander Shmylov, Moscow. Don't you think that one of the purposes, goals of this mad lawmaking is for this lawmaking process to be more and more crazy, to discredit the idea of parliamentarism, which is in a way a response to the protests of 2011. And that people are being shown that and of course, this may indeed lead to the further discrediting of the parliament. Interesting. Well, this is in a way a thought that I tried to formulate. Yes, indeed, we see how the ideas of parliamentarism are being compromised. Yes, indeed, the citizens are being told that, or tacitly implied that the lawmaking is made up of some morons. I generally am not a great proponent, and I do not much believe in conspiracy theories or strategic planning. But the compromise and the discrediting of the parliamentarism in Russia does take place. And people in 2012 people who went to the rallies were right, because the elections must be free and fair, and then the Duma will be different. Indeed, I would also agree that this is not a particularly easy thing to understand. And one of the trends of thoughts is that while discrediting the parliamentarism may increase the trust in the executive. The imitation democracy is an imitation democracy. There is a level of hypocrisy below which it cannot go. And I think that even in the international isolation will not in any way change our government today. Daria, your question is the last. If I may talk about the backlash. There is the norm of the international law. And when we speak about the European Convention for Human Rights and the European Court, we can go to this court as victims, but we can also be the potential victims, such as any law in the Russian Federation may make me a potential victim in compliance with the European Convention. How efficient do you believe are the international law norms in this respect? Well, they are efficient, but only in a long-term period. Even if you win a case in the European Court and the law will be recognized as violating the European Convention, it will not be abolished, but this may be useful. This may be quite useful. The Hague Court, which awarded $50 billion, I want to mind you that the representatives of Russia did not even go to this court. The case was heard for 10 years. For 10 years, the people said, "Oh, how good that we don't even visit this court." And we have been fined for $50 billion, and that there will be another Noga company. And I can imagine how the people who were responsible for representing Russia in these proceedings, what fury and what the terrible clouds are gathering above their heads. This also deals with the horizon of planning of the Russian bureaucracy. They are not interested in the day after tomorrow. It's like a gecko. All they're interested in is today. And tomorrow's the day after tomorrow is too far away. So I think there is every sense to make do, but they say the divine mills mill very finely. Thank you for this very professional presentation, and thank you for this information on the Russian parliamentarism. And we are very happy for Ekaterina Schulman to have come and joined us here at this session. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.